The bright morning sunlight streamed through the massive windows of Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floor of Terminal B. 12-year-old Alex Taylor clutched his backpack straps tightly, his heart beating a little faster than normal. This was his first time flying alone, and despite the countless family trips he'd taken before, standing here by himself made the bustling airport seem twice as big and 3 times as loud. Alex took a deep breath, remembering what his dad had told him that morning on their video call. Head high, eyes forward, and remember, you've got every right to be exactly where you are. His father had said these words to him many times over the years, a necessary mantra for a successful black man who had built an aviation empire from nothing, and now wanted his son to grow up with the same unwavering confidence. Glancing down at his phone, Alex confirmed he was at the right gate for his flight to Chicago. Gate C42. First-class boarding would begin in 20 minutes. He found an empty seat near the boarding area and pulled out his tablet, trying to focus on his game instead of his nerves. Every few minutes he would look up at the gate agents, watching as they prepared for boarding, their movements precise and practiced. When the first announcement came for premium passengers and those needing special assistance, Alex carefully tucked his tablet into his backpack. He double-checked his pocket for his boarding pass and ID, exactly as his father had instructed. Standing up, he smoothed down his navy blue button-up shirt and walked toward the line forming at the gate. 3 people stood ahead of him, a gray-haired businessman typing furiously on his phone, a middle-aged couple in matching vacation outfits, and a woman in a crisp pantsuit who looked like she lived her life in airport lounges and hotel conference rooms. Alex stood quietly behind them, boarding pass in hand, trying to mimic their casual confidence. When his turn came, he stepped forward and handed his ticket to the flight attendant managing the gate. Her name tag read, Diane Wilson. She had blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun and wore the signature blue and silver uniform of Skyway Airlines. Her smile disappeared the moment she looked at his boarding pass, then at him. "First class?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to make the businessman ahead of Alex turn around briefly. "Yes, ma'am," Alex replied politely, the way his parents had taught him. Diane's eyes narrowed. "Where are your parents?" "My dad is in Chicago," Alex explained. "I'm traveling to meet him." She looked down at his boarding pass again, then back at his face, her expression hardening. "Do you have ID?" Alex nodded and pulled out the laminated student ID card from his school, along with the special minor travel identification his father had arranged through the airline's unaccompanied minor program. Diane barely glanced at them. "This doesn't seem right," she said, her voice rising slightly. "We don't typically allow unaccompanied minors in first class. It's company policy." Alex's stomach tightened. This didn't make sense. His father had specifically arranged everything, had gone through all the proper channels. "My dad booked it for me," he said, his voice smaller than he intended. He said everything was approved. People behind him in line were beginning to shift impatiently. Alex could feel their stares boring into his back. "I think there's been a mistake," Diane said, her tone suggesting the mistake was entirely on Alex's part. "This ticket, it just doesn't look right to me." "What do you mean?" Alex asked, confusion clear in his voice. "What's wrong with it?" Instead of answering, Diane called over another airline employee, speaking in a hushed voice while occasionally glancing back at Alex. The other passengers in line began to murmur among themselves. Alex felt his cheeks growing warm as more eyes turned toward him. The second employee, a middle-aged man with a supervisor badge, looked at Alex with a mix of suspicion and annoyance. "Son, where did you get this ticket?" "My father bought it," Alex repeated, fighting to keep his voice steady. "He's a frequent flyer. He always books first class." The supervisor exchanged a look with Diane that Alex couldn't quite interpret, but it made him feel even smaller. "Look," Diane said, lowering her voice but not enough that Alex couldn't hear her. "We get kids trying to sneak into first class all the time. Usually they just download and edit tickets on their phones." Alex's eyes widened. I'll handle this," the supervisor cut in, turning back to Alex. "What's your father's name? We can look up the reservation." "James Taylor," Alex said, relief washing over him. Once they checked the system, everything would be cleared up. The supervisor typed something into his tablet, frowned, and typed again. "There's no James Taylor on our premium passenger list for this flight." Alex's mouth went dry. That couldn't be right. His dad had confirmed everything just that morning. Can you check again? Maybe it's under Taylor Enterprises? Or Skyway Executive Access? Diane let out an impatient sigh. Look, you're holding up the line. We need to… My dad said everything was arranged, Alex insisted, his voice cracking slightly. Please just call him. I have his number. We don't have time for this, Diane said firmly. Then before Alex could react, she took his boarding pass and tore it cleanly in half. The sound seemed to echo in Alex's ears. He stared in disbelief at the 2 pieces of paper in her hands. Hey! An older woman waiting in line called out. You can't just do that. Diane ignored her. If you want to fly today, you'll need to go back to the ticket counter and see if there are any economy seats available, she told Alex. And next time, don't try to use a fake ticket. It wasn't fake, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears threatened at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back furiously. He wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of all these people. A few passengers had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few outright concerned. A woman with gray-streaked hair stepped forward. Excuse me, she said to Diane. I don't think you should have done that. This young man was being completely respectful. Ma'am, this is airline business, Diane replied stiffly. We have procedures for a reason. Well, your procedures look an awful lot like profiling from where I'm standing, the woman replied, her voice carrying enough that several more heads turned. Alex wanted to disappear. This was becoming exactly the kind of scene his father had always taught him to avoid. It's okay, he said to the woman, though it very much wasn't. I'll call my dad. He stepped out of the line, hands trembling slightly as he pulled out his phone. Behind him, he could hear Diane calling for the next passenger as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just torn up his ticket and accused him of lying. Alex moved to a quiet corner near the window and pulled up his father's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button for a moment. His dad was busy. He was always busy. And Alex had promised he could handle this trip on his own. But he didn't know what else to do. He pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before his father's deep, steady voice answered. Alex, everything okay, son? Just hearing his father's voice made Alex's throat tighten. Dad, he managed, trying to sound calmer than he felt. There's a problem with my ticket. The flight attendant said it doesn't look right, and she tore it up. There was a brief silence on the other end. When his father spoke again, his voice was perfectly controlled. But Alex recognized the steel beneath it. She did what? She said unaccompanied minors aren't allowed in first class. Alex explained, the words coming faster now. She thought I faked the ticket. She tore it up and told me to go buy an economy seat if I want to fly today. Another silence, this one longer. Alex could almost see his father taking one of his measured breaths, the way he did whenever he needed to think clearly through his anger. Alex, listen to me carefully, his father finally said. I want you to find a seat near your gate and stay there. Don't go anywhere else. Don't speak to anyone from the airline. I'm going to handle this. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Alex replied automatically. Good, I'll call you right back. 5 minutes max. The call ended and Alex found an empty chair facing the gate. From there he could see Diane continuing to process passengers, her smile firmly back in place. The supervisor had disappeared. Most of the other travelers were avoiding looking at him now, perhaps embarrassed by what they had witnessed or simply relieved it wasn't their problem. Alex kept his eyes fixed on his phone, pretending to be absorbed in it while he waited. He knew his father would fix this. James Taylor didn't become one of the most successful black entrepreneurs in the aviation industry by letting obstacles stand in his way. Whatever was about to happen, Alex had a feeling Diane Wilson was completely unprepared for it. His phone lit up with an incoming text. On the line with airline headquarters now. Sit tight. Alex took a deep breath and settled back in his chair. His father always said that sometimes the best response to disrespect was simply to wait for the right moment. And if there was one thing James Taylor understood perfectly, it was timing. James Taylor stood at the window of his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Skyway Airlines headquarters in downtown Chicago. From this height, he could see the planes taking off and landing at O'Hare International Airport in the distance. Tiny silver birds rising and falling against the blue September sky. Each one carried his company's distinctive blue and silver livery, a design he had personally approved 5 years ago when he'd completed the buyout that made him the majority owner of what was now the country's third-largest airline. The phone on his desk buzzed. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Sir, I have the operations manager for Atlanta International on line 1. James turned from the window. "Put him through." He moved to his desk and pressed the speaker button. "Mr. Taylor, this is Raymond Chen, Atlanta operations manager. I understand there's been an incident involving your son." James sat down, his posture perfect, his voice controlled despite the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Mr. Chen, approximately 10 minutes ago, one of your gate agents tore up my son's first-class boarding pass and accused him of trying to use a fake ticket. I want to understand how this happened." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, I'm just getting details now. If you could give me a moment. My son is 12 years old. Mr. Chen. He's sitting alone at your gate right now because one of your employees decided he didn't look like he belonged in first class." Another pause. Longer this time. James could hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard. "I see the booking now, sir. It appears there was a system error. The gate agent couldn't verify the premium booking because it was processed through our executive portal." "A system error," James repeated, his tone making it clear he didn't believe that for a second. "The executive portal that exists specifically for situations like this." "Yes, sir. I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. I'll personally go to the gate immediately and—" "The gate agent's name is Diane Wilson," James interrupted. "I want to know if this is how she typically treats unaccompanied minors, or if there was something specific about my son that made her decide his ticket must be fake." The line went silent again, except for the sound of Raymond's breathing. "Mr. Taylor, I assure you we take these matters very seriously. I'll investigate this personally." "That's good to hear," James said, "because I'll be investigating it personally as well." "Sir?" James checked his watch. "My private jet is being prepared as we speak. I'll be at your airport in approximately 2 hours. In the meantime, I expect my son to be escorted to the Skyway Premium Lounge and treated with the courtesy that any of our passengers deserves." He paused. "And, Mr. Chen? I don't want Ms. Wilson to be informed of who Alex's father is." "Not yet." "Understood, sir." After ending the call, James stood and walked to the small closet in his office where he kept a spare suit and overnight bag for unexpected trips. As CEO, he rarely traveled on short notice anymore. His days were typically scheduled weeks in advance. But some situations couldn't be delegated. His phone buzzed with a text from his executive assistant. "Jet ready in 30, car waiting downstairs." James typed a quick reply, then called Alex. His son answered on the first ring. "Dad, everything's going to be okay," James said, his voice gentler than it had been with the operations manager. "Someone is going to come to the gate and bring you to the lounge where you can wait comfortably." "I'm coming to Atlanta." "You're coming here?" Alex sounded surprised. "But what about your meetings?" James smiled despite his anger. His son was always thinking about others, even when he was the one who'd been wronged. Some things are more important than meetings. "I'll be there in about 2 hours. You don't have to come, Dad. I can just take a later flight or—" "Alex?" James cut in firmly. "What happened to you wasn't right. And it wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. I need to address it personally." There was a small silence on the other end. "Okay," Alex finally said, his voice small. "Hey," James said. "Remember what I always tell you? Head high, eyes forward," Alex replied automatically. "And remember, you have every right to be exactly where you are," James finished. "I'll see you soon, son." 45 minutes later, James was aboard his private jet, a sleek Gulfstream G650 that served as both his mobile office and his occasional sanctuary from the constant demands of running an airline. As the plane climbed through the clouds, he opened his laptop and began typing an email to his chief of staff and legal counsel, outlining what had happened and what he intended to do about it. This wasn't the first time James had encountered prejudice in the aviation industry. As one of the few black executives in a field dominated by white men, he'd faced everything from subtle dismissals to outright hostility throughout his 20-year climb, from baggage handler to CEO. He'd learned to choose his battles carefully, to know when to fight and when to strategically retreat. But this time was different. This time it wasn't about him. James had worked hard to shield Alex from some of the harsher realities of being black in America. Not to hide these truths. That would be doing his son a disservice, but to give him time to build the confidence and security he would need to face them. He'd hoped that Alex's first solo trip would be a positive experience, a small step toward independence. Instead, it had become a painful lesson in how quickly people could make assumptions based on the color of his skin. The jet was halfway to Atlanta when James received a text from Alex. "I'm in the lounge now. There's a man named Raymond here who keeps apologizing to me." James smiled grimly. Good. At least Chen was taking this seriously. He typed back, "Enjoy the snacks. I'll be there soon." As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, James's mind turned to Diane Wilson. He wasn't interested in having her fired. That would be too easy. A quick solution that solved nothing. No, what he wanted was understanding. He wanted to know what had gone through her mind when she looked at his son and decided he didn't belong in first class. The car was waiting for him when he landed. A black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who knew better than to attempt small talk when James had that particular expression on his face. The drive to the main terminal took less than 15 minutes. James straightened his tie as he walked through the executive entrance of the airport. He wore one of his finest suits, a charcoal gray Tom Ford that he reserved for board meetings and important negotiations. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, his cufflinks, a gift from Alex last Father's Day, glinting at his wrists. Every detail of his appearance was deliberate. In his experience, people who were quick to judge his son based on appearances tended to respond differently when confronted with power and success they couldn't dismiss. Raymond. Chen was waiting for him at the entrance to the Skyway Premium Lounge, a nervous smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Taylor, welcome to Atlanta. Again, I want to express our deepest where's my son?" James interrupted. Raymond's smile faltered. "Right this way, sir." The lounge was a peaceful oasis compared to the busy terminal outside. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, and the quiet murmur of business travelers created an atmosphere of exclusive tranquility. Alex was sitting in a corner, his backpack beside him, a half-eaten plate of fruit and cheese on the table. The moment he saw his father, Alex jumped to his feet. James crossed the room in a few long strides and pulled his son into a tight hug. For a moment, he was just a father holding his boy. All thoughts of airlines and gate agents forgotten. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Alex nodded against his shoulder. "I'm fine, just embarrassed, I guess." James stepped back, keeping his hands on Alex's shoulders. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Nothing that happened today was your fault." From the corner of his eye, James could see Raymond hovering nearby, along with several other Skyway executives who had apparently materialized upon hearing that the CEO was in the building. James turned to them. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Wilson now." Raymond cleared his throat. "She's waiting in the conference room as you requested. She doesn't know who you are yet. Just that a senior executive wants to discuss the incident." James nodded. "Good." He looked back at Alex. "Do you want to come with me, or would you prefer to wait here?" Alex hesitated, clearly torn. Part of him probably wanted to stay as far away as possible from the woman who had humiliated him, but James saw the moment his son made his decision, squaring his small shoulders in an unconscious mirror of his father's posture. "I'll come with you." Pride swelled in James's chest. "All right then." He turned to Raymond. "Lead the way." As they walked through the terminal toward the administrative offices, James noticed how staff members stopped and stared, whispering to each other as he passed. Word was spreading quickly. By the time they reached the small conference room where Diane Wilson waited, James could feel the tension in the air, thick as storm clouds. Raymond paused at the door. "Would you like me to introduce you, or?" "That won't be necessary," James said. "Just open the door." Raymond nodded and stepped aside. James put his hand lightly on Alex's back, a silent message of support, and together they walked into the room where Diane Wilson sat alone, nervously fidgeting with a pen, completely unaware that her entire career was about to change forever. Diane Wilson sat alone at the conference room table, her fingers drumming nervously against the polished wood surface. In her 15 years as a flight attendant, she had never been called in for a meeting with senior management. The email had been vague, a discussion about an incident at Gate C-42, but she knew exactly what it was about. That boy with the first-class ticket. She still believed she'd done the right thing. Airlines had protocols for unaccompanied minors, and first class was usually off-limits unless special arrangements had been made. The ticket had looked odd to her. Something about the booking code wasn't standard. Clearly a fake. She'd seen it before. Teenagers trying to sneak into premium cabins with doctored boarding passes. But the way Raymond Chen, the operations manager, had looked at her when he'd pulled her from the flight rotation, something wasn't right. The door opened and Diane straightened in her chair. Her eyes widened as a tall, impeccably dressed black man walked in, followed by, her stomach dropped, the boy from the gate. Raymond Chen slipped in behind them, closing the door quietly. The man didn't sit. Instead, he stood at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. His eyes, dark and intense, fixed on Diane. "Ms. Wilson," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I'm James Taylor." The name hung in the air for a moment before recognition dawned on Diane's face. James Taylor, the CEO of Skyway Airlines, the owner, the man whose picture hung in the staff break room, whose signature was on her paychecks. "And this," James continued, nodding to the boy beside him, "is my son, Alex." Diane felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the boy, Alex, seeing him properly for the first time. The resemblance was there in the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. How had she missed it? "Mr. Taylor," she began, her voice catching. James held up a hand, silencing her. "Before you speak, Ms. Wilson, I'd like to understand exactly what happened today. According to my son, you tore up his valid first-class boarding pass and accused him of using a fake ticket. Is that correct?" Diane swallowed hard. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding. The booking didn't appear correctly in our system, and company policy states that unaccompanied minors typically fly in economy unless special arrangements like those made through the executive portal." James interrupted. "The same portal I personally used to book my son's ticket? I didn't see that in the system," Diane stammered. "That's interesting," James said, his tone still perfectly controlled. "Because Raymond here tells me the booking was clearly marked as an executive reservation, a designation that should have been visible to any gate agent who bothered to check properly." Raymond Chen looked down at his shoes, clearly uncomfortable being drawn into the conversation. Diane felt a flash of anger. She was being set up, made to take the fall for a system error. "With all due respect, sir," she said, finding her voice, "if the booking had shown up properly, I would have honored it. But it didn't, and I was following protocol for what appeared to be an irregular ticket." James nodded slowly. "Let's set aside the system issue for a moment. Even if you couldn't verify the booking, was it necessary to tear my son's ticket in half, in front of a terminal full of passengers? Couldn't you have simply called a supervisor to help resolve the situation?" Diane opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no good answer to that question. She looked at Alex, who was standing quietly beside his father, eyes downcast. She felt a twinge of something, shame maybe. "I apologize if I overreacted," she said finally. "It was a busy morning and I needed to keep the line moving." "A busy morning," James repeated softly. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Alex to do the same. "Ms. Wilson, I've worked for this airline for 20 years. I started as a baggage handler, worked my way up through customer service, operations, and eventually management. I know exactly how hectic a boarding gate can be. I also know that tearing up a passenger's ticket is not standard procedure under any circumstances." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What was it about my son that made you so certain his ticket was fake?" The question hung in the air between them. Diane felt trapped, cornered by what James was implying. She glanced at Raymond, hoping for some support, but the operations manager was studiously avoiding her gaze. I didn't," she began, then stopped, unsure how to continue without making things worse. "It's okay," Alex said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear. "You can just say it." All eyes turned to the boy, who was looking directly at Diane now. There was no anger in his expression, just a kind of tired understanding that seemed far too mature for a 12-year-old. "You didn't think I looked like I belonged in first class," he said simply, "because of how I look." Diane felt her face grow hot. "That's not true," she protested. "It had nothing to do with that." "With what, Ms. Wilson?" James asked, his voice still calm but with an edge now. "With the fact that my son is black? That he doesn't fit your image of what a first-class passenger should look like?" "No," Diane said too loudly. She lowered her voice. "No, of course not. I would never. I'm not Racist? James supplied. I'm not calling you that, Ms. Wilson. I'm asking you to consider whether you might have made assumptions based on appearances. Assumptions you wouldn't have made if my son were white. Diane felt tears threatening. This wasn't fair. She wasn't that kind of person. She treated all passengers the same. Didn't she? But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered otherwise. Would she have been so quick to assume the ticket was fake if Alex had been a different color? Would she have torn it up without making absolutely sure? I don't know what to say, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded as if her response confirmed something for him. That's an honest answer, at least. He turned to Raymond. Could you give us a few minutes, please? The operations manager looked relieved to be dismissed. He hurried out, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Once they were alone, James's posture relaxed slightly. Ms. Wilson, do you know why I came here today instead of simply having you fired? Diane blinked in surprise. No, sir. Because firing you would be easy, he said. It would make me feel better for about 5 minutes. But it wouldn't change anything. Not really. He glanced at his son. Alex, do you want to tell Ms. Wilson what you told me on the phone? Alex shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable being put on the spot, but he nodded. I said I didn't think you should lose your job, he told Diane. I thought maybe you needed training instead. Diane stared at the boy, genuinely surprised. You said that? After how I treated you? Alex shrugged. My dad always says that mistakes are how we learn, as long as we admit we made them and try to do better. James smiled at his son, pride evident in his expression. Then he turned back to Diane. So, Ms. Wilson, did you make a mistake today? The question was simple, but Diane felt the weight of it. Her job, her reputation, perhaps her entire future at Skyway Airlines hung on her answer. She could continue to defend herself, to insist it was all a misunderstanding, a system error, or she could admit the truth, not just to James and Alex, but to herself. She took a deep breath. Yes, she said finally. I made a mistake. Several, actually. She looked at Alex. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. You deserved better. Much better. The boy nodded, accepting her apology with a maturity that made Diane feel even worse about her behavior. And you're right, she continued, turning to James. I did make assumptions. I saw a young black boy traveling alone with a first-class ticket, and I jumped to conclusions I shouldn't have. I didn't even give him the benefit of the doubt. Saying it out loud was painful, but also strangely freeing. Diane felt tears threatening again, but this time from a place of genuine remorse rather than self-pity. What happens now? She asked quietly. James considered her for a moment. That depends, he said. If you're willing to learn from this, to really examine your biases and work to change them, then I think there's a way forward. Not as a gate agent, at least not immediately, but as part of a larger effort to address these issues within our company. What do you mean? Diane asked. Skyway Airlines is about to launch a comprehensive training program on unconscious bias and inclusive customer service, James explained. Every employee will go through it, from baggage handlers to board members. I think your perspective could be valuable to that program, as an example of how these biases can affect our interactions without us even realizing it. Diane felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a chance to make amends, to grow, to be better. I'd like that, she said softly. Thank you, James nodded. Don't thank me yet. This won't be easy. You'll need to confront some uncomfortable truths about yourself. But if you're sincere about wanting to change, I believe you can. He stood up, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. You'll be on administrative leave for the next 2 weeks. Use that time to reflect. When you return, you'll work directly with our newly formed diversity and inclusion team. Your first assignment will be to help develop training scenarios based on real incidents, including what happened today. Diane stood as well, feeling slightly lightheaded from the emotional roller coaster of the past hour. I understand, and I promise I won't let you down. James's expression remained serious. It's not me you need to worry about letting down, he said, glancing meaningfully at his son. It's the next Alex Taylor who walks up to your gate, the one whose father doesn't own the airline. As Diane watched James and Alex leave the conference room, those words echoed in her mind. The next Alex Taylor. How many had there been before? How many times had she made snap judgments based on appearances, never knowing the impact of her actions? For the first time, She truly understood the weight of her position, not just as a gate agent but as the first point of contact for thousands of travelers from all walks of life. People who deserved to be seen for who they were, not who she assumed them to be. It was a humbling realization. And long overdue. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Atlanta International Airport. Alex sat at his desk in his bedroom, staring at the blank document on his computer screen. His English teacher had assigned a personal essay about a life-changing experience, and Alex knew exactly what he wanted to write about. Getting the words right, though, was proving difficult. How could he explain what it felt like to be humiliated in front of a terminal full of strangers, to have someone look at him and decide based on nothing but his appearance that he didn't belong? A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. His father poked his head in. "Homework?" Alex nodded. "That essay I told you about." "I'm stuck." James stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Want to talk it through?" Alex spun his chair to face his dad. "I want to write about what happened at the airport, but I don't know how to start. Everything I try sounds either too angry or too, I don't know, like I'm trying to pretend it didn't hurt." James was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes the most honest place to start is with the feelings. Not just the anger or the hurt, but everything you felt that day. "I felt small," Alex said after a pause. "Like I was suddenly invisible and too visible at the same time." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," James said softly. "Write that down." Alex turned back to his computer and began to type. The words came easier now, flowing from a place of honest reflection rather than forced composition. He wrote about standing at the gate, about the sudden shift in Diane's expression when she looked at his ticket, then at him, about the shame that washed over him when she tore it in half, and the strange mixture of gratitude and embarrassment when the older woman spoke up for him. He wrote about seeing his father walk into the terminal, looking every inch the powerful CEO in his expensive suit, and the pride he felt at being his son. But he also wrote about the sad reality that his father couldn't always be there to protect him, that someday he would face similar situations on his own. When he finished the first draft, he let his father read it. James was quiet for a long time after he finished, and when he looked up, Alex was surprised to see tears in his eyes. "This is powerful, Alex. Really powerful. Your teacher will be impressed." "You think so?" Alex asked, suddenly uncertain. "It's not too personal?" James shook his head. "The best writing usually is personal. It's honest. And you've been very fair here, even to Ms. Wilson." Alex shrugged. "I've been thinking about her a lot, actually." "Do you know how she's doing with that training program thing?" "As a matter of fact," James said, "I received a report yesterday. She's been working closely with the diversity team, helping develop new training scenarios based on real-world situations. By all accounts, she's taking it very seriously." "Good," Alex said simply. James studied his son's face. "You know, most people wouldn't be so forgiving in your position." "I'm not sure if it's forgiveness exactly," Alex said thoughtfully. "It's more like, I want something good to come out of what happened. If she learns from it and helps other people learn too, then maybe it wasn't all bad." James smiled, a mixture of pride and something like wonder on his face. "When did you get so wise, huh?" He ruffled Alex's hair the way he used to when Alex was younger. "Dad," Alex protested, ducking away. "I'm not a little kid anymore." "I know," James said, suddenly serious. "Trust me, I know." He stood up. "Listen, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. A proposal I'm taking to the board next week." Alex saved his essay and gave his father his full attention. He knew that tone. It meant his dad was working on something important. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," James continued. "Not just about you and Ms. Wilson, but about all the other kids who might find themselves in similar situations. Kids who don't have a father who can fly in on a private jet to set things right." "What kind of proposal?" Alex asked, intrigued. "A new initiative for the airline. We're calling it Skyway Next Generation. The idea is to create pathways into the aviation industry for young people from underrepresented backgrounds, internships, educational programs, mentoring. I want to make sure that the next generation of pilots, flight attendants, engineers, and executives looks more like the passengers they serve." Alex's eyes widened. "That sounds amazing." "I thought you might like it," James said with a smile, "and I was hoping you might help me launch it. The board wants to announce it at the annual gala next month." I'd like you to speak there if you're willing. Maybe read part of your essay. Me? Alex squeaked, his voice betraying his surprise. Speak at the gala? In front of all those people? Only if you want to, James assured him. No pressure. But I think your perspective would be valuable. Powerful even. Alex swallowed hard. The thought of standing at a podium in front of hundreds of airline executives and board members was terrifying. But then he thought about his essay, about the feelings he'd just put into words. Maybe sharing those words could make a difference. I'll think about it, he promised. That's all I ask, James said, heading for the door. Oh, and dinner's in 30 minutes. Your grandmother made her famous lasagna. I'll be down, Alex said, turning back to his computer to make a few final edits to his essay. A month later, Alex stood backstage at the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, tugging nervously at the sleeves of his new suit. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see hundreds of people in formal attire, seated at round tables adorned with blue and silver centerpieces, Skyway Airlines colors. At the front of the room, a large screen displayed the airline's logo alongside the words, Skyway Next Generation, building the future of aviation. His father appeared beside him, looking calm and collected in his tuxedo. You ready? Alex nodded, though his stomach was doing somersaults. I think so. Remember, James said, placing a hand on his shoulder, just speak from the heart the way you did in your essay. These people need to hear your story. A moment later, they heard the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of Skyway Airlines, James Taylor, and his son, Alex. The audience applauded as James led Alex onto the stage. The lights were brighter than Alex had expected, making it difficult to see individual faces in the crowd. In some ways, that made it easier. James stepped up to the microphone first. Thank you all for being here tonight. Before I introduce our new initiative, I want to share a story with you. A personal story about an incident that took place at one of our gates last month. He went on to describe what had happened to Alex, speaking with a measured clarity that somehow made the story even more powerful. When he finished, there was a hushed silence in the room. My son's experience is not unique, James continued. Every day, people are judged, dismissed, or denied opportunities based on nothing more than their appearance. As leaders in the aviation industry, we have a responsibility to do better. He turned to Alex. I'd like to invite my son to share his perspective with you. Alex stepped forward, his heart pounding. He unfolded the paper with his edited essay, took a deep breath, and began to read. I was 12 years old the first time someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong, he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. It won't be the last time. But what matters isn't just what happened to me that day at Gate C-42. What matters is what happens next. As he read, he could feel the room growing still, hundreds of people listening intently to his words. By the time he reached the end of his essay, his voice was steady and clear. The woman who tore up my ticket made a mistake, he concluded. A mistake based on assumptions and biases she might not have even known she had. But mistakes are how we learn. As long as we admit we made them and try to do better, that's what my dad always says, and I believe it's true. Not just for individuals, but for companies, for industries, for our whole society. We all need to do better. The applause that followed was thunderous. Alex looked out at the sea of faces, many nodding, some wiping away tears, and felt a surge of something powerful. Not pride exactly, more like purpose. His father stepped back to the microphone to formally announce the Skyway Next Generation initiative. As he detailed the programs they were launching, the scholarships, the internships, the community partnerships, Alex noticed a familiar face at one of the front tables. Diane Wilson sat there in a simple black dress, watching intently as James described the new comprehensive training program that would be mandatory for all Skyway employees. When James mentioned that the program had been developed with input from staff who had experienced firsthand the impact of unconscious bias, Diane's eyes briefly met Alex's across the room. She gave him a small, solemn nod, not a greeting exactly, but an acknowledgement of his words, his experience, his humanity. In that moment, Alex understood that what had happened between them had changed them both. Later, at the reception following the presentation, many people approached Alex to thank him for his courage in sharing his story. Board members, executives, even a few celebrities who had been invited as special guests, all of them wanted to shake his hand, to tell him how moved they were by his words. But the conversation that stayed with him longest was the brief exchange with Diane, who approached him while his father was deep in conversation with the chairman of the board. "Hello, Alex," she said, her voice tentative. "Hi, Ms. Wilson," he replied, equally uncertain. "Your speech it was really something, really powerful. Thanks." There was an awkward pause, neither quite sure what to say next. "I want you to know," Diane finally continued, "that I'm grateful for the chance to learn from what happened, to be part of making things better instead of worse." She hesitated. "Not everyone gets that kind of second chance." Alex nodded. "My dad believes in second chances. So do I. He's a good man," Diane said, "and you're a lot like him." It was the highest compliment anyone had ever paid him. Alex felt his cheeks warm. "Thank you." As Diane walked away, Alex's father rejoined him. "Everything okay?" James asked, having noticed their conversation. "Yeah," Alex said, surprised to find that he meant it. "I think it is." James smiled and put an arm around his son's shoulders. "You were amazing up there." Stole the show, actually. "The board is 100% behind the initiative now." "Really?" Alex asked, brightening. "Really. In fact, they've suggested making it an annual event with a scholarship in your name." Alex's eyes widened. "In my name?" "But I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth." James looked at his son with immense pride. Sometimes, Alex, telling the truth is the most special thing a person can do, especially when that truth is hard to hear. He squeezed Alex's shoulder. "You changed hearts and minds tonight. Never underestimate the power of that." As they made their way through the crowded ballroom, Alex felt different somehow, taller perhaps, more certain of himself and his place in the world. One day at an airport gate, someone had tried to make him feel small, to make him believe he didn't belong. Tonight he had reclaimed that moment and transformed it into something powerful. Head high, eyes forward, he thought to himself. "I have every right to be exactly where I am." 6 months had passed since the gala where Alex had shared his story with hundreds of airline executives and industry leaders. It was a mild spring afternoon, and he stood at the front of a classroom at Benjamin Franklin High School in Atlanta, facing 30 curious teenagers not much older than himself. "Before I start," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his nerves, "I want to thank you all for being part of the first Skyway Next Generation Youth Aviation Program." The students, a diverse group of high schoolers from across the city, watched him with varying degrees of interest. Some leaned forward eagerly, while others slouched in their chairs, clearly skeptical about why they were there. 6 months ago, something happened to me at Atlanta International Airport that changed my life, Alex continued, and not just my life, but potentially the future of the airline industry. As Alex shared his story, the torn ticket, his father's intervention, and the changes that followed, he could see the expressions on the students' faces shift. The skeptical ones sat up straighter. The eager ones nodded in recognition of experiences all too familiar. "That's why we're all here today," Alex concluded, "because my dad and I believe that the best way to prevent what happened to me from happening to others is to change who gets to make decisions in the aviation industry. And that starts with all of you." At the back of the classroom, James Taylor leaned against the wall, watching his son with undisguised pride. Beside him stood Diane Wilson, now the Assistant Director of Diversity and Inclusion Training for Skyway Airlines. They had flown to Atlanta together to launch this pilot program, the first of 12 planned across the country. "He's a natural," Diane murmured. "Hard to believe he's just 13, James nodded. "He's found his voice." Alex was now explaining the structure of the 6-week program, the airport tours, the flight simulator sessions, the mentoring with pilots and engineers, the college scholarship opportunities. The students were fully engaged now, hands shooting up with questions about how to apply for the internships, what skills they would need, whether they could really become pilots if they didn't have perfect vision. "You don't need perfect vision to be a pilot anymore," Alex answered, repeating what he'd learned during his own research. "And you definitely don't need to look a certain way or come from a certain background to work in aviation. That's the whole point of this program." Later, as the students filed out with their information packets and signed permission forms, a tall girl with braided hair lingered behind. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Alex. "Something personal?" "Sure," Alex replied, still riding the high of his successful presentation. "Weren't you angry?" When that flight attendant tore up your ticket, I mean. I think I would have been really angry. Alex considered her question. I was at first, he admitted. But then I realized that anger by itself doesn't fix anything. My dad taught me that it's what you do with that feeling that matters. The girl nodded thoughtfully. My mom says the same thing. She says getting mad is easy, but making change is hard. Your mom sounds smart, Alex said with a smile. She is. She's a bus driver for the city. Been doing it for 15 years. The girl straightened her shoulders. I'm going to be a pilot. First in my family to fly anything. I believe you will, Alex said, and he meant it. After the classroom emptied, James and Diane joined Alex at the front of the room. That went well, James said, giving his son a quick side hug. You handled those questions like a pro. Alex beamed at the praise. It felt good. Different from the gala, you know. These kids are actually going to be doing the program. And hopefully joining Skyway Airlines in a few years, Diane added. She still seemed slightly uncomfortable around Alex, a lingering awareness of their first disastrous meeting. But over the months of working together on the initiative, they had developed a cautious rapport. How many applications did we get for this location? Alex asked. Over 200, Diane replied, for 30 spots. The response has been overwhelming. And not just here, James added. We're getting calls from other airlines wanting to partner with us, from schools across the country asking to be part of the program. The board just approved expanding to 20 locations by next year. Alex's eyes widened. 20, that's amazing. It is, James agreed. But we've got our work cut out for us. After we finish the launch here, we're flying straight to Chicago to meet with the curriculum development team. Actually, Diane interjected, checking her phone. There's been a slight change of plans. The team from United wants to meet us here in Atlanta tomorrow. They're sending their VP of operations to discuss implementing a similar program. James raised an eyebrow. Competition or collaboration? Both, probably, Diane said with a small smile. That's how change happens in this industry. No one wants to be left behind. As they gathered their materials and headed out of the classroom, Alex found himself reflecting on how much had changed in 6 months. His school essay about the incident had been published in the Airline's employee magazine and had circulated widely within the industry. The training program Diane had helped develop was now being adopted by other airlines, and the Skyway Next Generation initiative had grown from a single scholarship program into a comprehensive approach to diversifying the aviation workforce. None of it would have happened if his ticket hadn't been torn up that day at gate C-42. Penny for your thoughts? James asked as they walked toward the parking lot. I was just thinking about how weird it is, Alex replied. If Ms. Wilson hadn't torn up my ticket, none of this would be happening. Diane, walking slightly ahead of them, stiffened visibly at his words but didn't turn around. Maybe, maybe not, James said thoughtfully. The problem was there all along. The biases, the lack of diversity in the industry, the barriers for young people like the ones we just met. What happened to you just made it impossible to ignore anymore. That evening, they had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The conversation flowed easily between discussions of the day's events and plans for the next phase of the initiative. Diane, who had once been so nervous in James's presence that she could barely speak, was now confidently presenting her ideas for expanding the training program internationally. The issues we're addressing aren't unique to American Airlines, she explained. I've been in talks with carriers in Europe and Asia who are dealing with similar challenges. James nodded. Draft a proposal. If it's solid, I'll take it to the board. As the meal wound down, Diane excused herself to take a phone call, leaving father and son alone at the table. You know, James said, swirling the water in his glass. I've been meaning to ask you something. Are you interested in running the foundation full-time when you're older? Alex looked surprised. The foundation? The Skyway Next Generation Foundation, James clarified. We're setting it up as a separate entity from the airline, with its own budget, board, and staff. It'll oversee all the educational initiatives, scholarship programs, community partnerships. Someone's going to have to run it eventually. But that's years away, Alex pointed out. I'm only 13, James smiled. I know. But it's never too early to start thinking about the future. You've got a gift, Alex. The way you connect with people, the way you tell your story, it makes a difference. I've seen it. Alex felt a warm glow of pride at his father's words. I'd like that, he admitted. But I still want to learn to fly too. No reason you can't do both, James said. That's the whole point of what we're doing, opening doors, creating possibilities. When Diane returned to the table, she had an odd expression on her face. Everything okay? James asked. More than okay, she said, sliding back into her seat. That was a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They want to do a feature story on the program, specifically on how it started. She looked directly at Alex. They want to interview you. Tell your story in your own words. Alex felt a flutter of nervousness. Me and the newspaper? Only if you want to, James said quickly. No pressure. Alex thought about it for a moment. 6 months ago, the idea of being interviewed by a newspaper would have terrified him. But he wasn't the same person he had been then. The shy, insecure boy who had stood alone at Gate C-42 had found his voice, his purpose. I'll do it, he decided, but I want to make sure they understand that it's not just about what happened to me. It's about all the kids who never get a chance because someone decides they don't belong. Diane nodded, a look of respect in her eyes. I'll make that clear to them. As they left the restaurant, the city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars. Alex felt a sense of possibility that extended far beyond the skyline, far beyond even the boundaries of his young life. 3 years later, on his 16th birthday, Alex Taylor became the youngest person ever to address the International Aviation Alliance's annual conference. Standing at the podium in Geneva, Switzerland, he looked out at the sea of faces, airline executives, industry leaders, aviation professionals from 6 continents, and thought about how far he'd come from that traumatic day at the Atlanta airport. 4 years ago, a flight attendant tore up my ticket because she didn't think I belonged in first class, he began, his voice strong and clear. Today, thanks to the Skyway Next Generation Foundation, more than 5,000 young people from underrepresented backgrounds have participated in aviation education programs. 300 have received college scholarships. 50 are currently in pilot training. Hundreds more are studying engineering, air traffic control, airline management. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about changing the face of aviation, literally. It's about making sure that the people who work in this industry reflect the diversity of the people who rely on it. And it's about understanding that inclusion isn't just a moral imperative, it's good business. As he continued his speech, detailing the foundation's successes and future plans, Alex caught his father's eye in the front row. James gave him a subtle nod of encouragement, the same look he'd given Alex before his first speech at the gala 4 years earlier. Diane Wilson sat beside James, now the full director of diversity and inclusion for Skyway, and a respected voice in the industry. The training program she had helped develop had been implemented by airlines around the world, and she had recently been featured in Aviation Weekly's Top 40 Under 40 list. In conclusion, Alex said, wrapping up his speech, what started as a painful experience for one 12-year-old boy has grown into a movement that is reshaping an entire industry. Not because of that boy, or even because of his father, but because thousands of people like you decided that it was time for change. The applause was deafening. As Alex stepped away from the podium, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here, for every step of it, even the painful ones. Head high, eyes forward, he thought to himself, repeating his father's mantra. I have every right to be exactly where I am, and so does everyone else.